So welcome back, everybody. Hope you're all back with us, even though that was a quick leg stretcher. We'll try and get more of them in during the day, and we have some very good breaks built in for networking too. So the next session, I'm really excited to hear, actually. And we're going with the Swedish theme. I get to say the name Malin with the correct pronunciation, as I have lots of practice living here in Stockholm. But Malin is VP and Head of Strategic Programs, Global Field Marketing at SAP. Vice President of Field Marketing, that means she leads international teams in identifying, testing, and piloting new ways to communicate and collaborate with their customers, users, and influencers. One of the pilots was introducing social selling to over 7,000 marketing and sales professionals at SAP, generating over €1 billion in pipeline. That sounds like the kind of number that I get embarrassed to talk about with my leadership team, because they never believe we can have that much impact. So I can't wait to hear more. Over to you, Malin.
Thank you very much for the lovely introduction and the perfect pronunciation of my name. I'm very excited to be here today too, to talk about how we are indeed winning with social selling and employee advocacy. And I will not bore you with a lot of details about SAP, because I think most of you probably know that we are the world's largest provider of enterprise application software. But I brought a few other facts that maybe you don't know about SAP, just as an introduction. And for me, it's even fascinating to think about the fact that 77% of the world's transaction revenue touches an SAP system. That's pretty huge, and it definitely makes me both proud and also filled with a great sense of responsibility towards our customers. But there are also other things that I really am excited about when it comes to working for this company, and that is how technology is used for good. Our mission, you might have heard, is to help businesses run better, but also to improve people's lives and the planet that we live on. So it's to me, it's fascinating to see that we are using SAP workforce software to dispatch disaster relief people, resources, to the right places where they are needed the most to help save lives. Technology is also used very effectively to protect endangered species from poaching. And there is a very fascinating project. If you have a moment, maybe one of the breaks, you can look it up, where we are using technology to protect rainforests. I didn't know this either before I heard this story, but we actually put up mobile phones, old cell phones, in the trees in rainforests that need protection. And this is the fascinating fact, comes now. When people enter into the forest, when the loggers enter into the forests, even before they start cutting down the trees, apparently the birds stop singing. And this is detected, this change in the environment is detected by the system, by the mobile phones that are powered by solar cells, transmitted to the SAP Cloud platform to give the rangers a head start in preventing the trees from being cut down. So there are some really fascinating ways to use technology. Also in cancer treatment, we use big data to analyze a lot of information about the patients, about relevant research to help find the perfect solution for each of the patients. So there are a lot of areas in which we can use technology. And I think if you turn on the TV, if you look at the news on social media, there is an exciting movement around how we can innovate for the better of the planet and for people. So we are here today not just to talk about how to make the planet a better place, but also how to win with social selling and employee advocacy, which is also a very fascinating topic. And I will share with you today a couple of reasons why you should care. I really do hope that you already care, because otherwise you probably wouldn't be in this presentation. But maybe I can give you some additional insights, some additional reasons that you could use to also talk to your stakeholders, to people in your companies, to help with an investment case for these areas that I know can bring so much value to an organization. I want to share a little bit about the social selling journey at SAP, the results. It was already part of the introduction. We did make a lot of money with social selling. We're still making a lot of money with social selling. And I actually believe that scaling this from the quota carriers, which is what we do when we talk about social selling, to employee advocacy is an even bigger opportunity. So we'll talk about that too. And I will share with you towards the end some of my key learnings to help you maybe not make the same mistakes as I did, or to move faster through this cycle. So let's jump right in. I hope you like Dilbert as much as I do. Personal online presence really matters. And this is really at the core what social selling and employee advocacy is about. It's our online presence. And we saw this year, certainly, that it matters more than ever before. This cartoon I've used for many years, so it's before the pandemic. It was true then, but it's even more true today. And here you have a situation where a hiring manager is interviewing a candidate. And the candidate has a very good CV, so the hiring manager is impressed. But then he notices that this candidate has no social media score, is almost zero. He has no friends, no followers, no social influence whatsoever. And the candidate has a pretty good explanation for this. He says, I was busy doing all this good work that you can now see in my CV. That's why I didn't have time to hang out on social. But the hiring manager isn't impressed. He thinks it means that the candidate is pretty much dead. And of course, this is crass, this is exaggerated, that's why it's funny, it's Dilbert. But the truth is that everything that happens today more than ever starts with search online. If someone is looking for a candidate, if someone is looking for a speaker at a conference, if someone is looking for a customer, a supplier, a business partner, no matter what, it starts with search, which means it starts before there is a personal conversation in most cases. And this in turn then means that if we don't show up the right way in an online search for the opportunities that might be interesting to us, we are missing the opportunities before we know they even existed. So online presence matters more than ever before. And that's why social selling and employee advocacy is so important and is such a big opportunity. And here's my definition. There are many out there, but for me, social selling and employee advocacy is turning individual expertise, reputation, and network of the employees individually into business and career value. So there is value for the individuals because it is their reputation, but it also brings a lot of benefit for the companies that they work for. And so this is how it started at SAP with social selling a couple of years ago. And it was really a classical, I would say almost like an innovator's dilemma. The hardest part of our job, we knew there was something in there. We knew social selling was worth investing in. And the hardest people to convince were the most successful sellers, ironically. But actually, it is logical. These successful sellers were so skilled at pulling the cart up the hill with the square wheels that they didn't see a reason to look at us there with the round wheels. They were really good at what they were doing. They were really good at selling in an offline environment. So they didn't think they needed to change anything. They didn't think they needed to do something different. So our hardest job in the situation was to convince them that once we give these round wheels to everyone around them, if they don't adopt these practices too, no matter how skilled they are at pulling the cart with the square wheels, others are going to be faster. So it was very much a classical innovator's dilemma where we had to convince people that they were going to be overtaken left and right if they didn't change something that they didn't see a need for changing because they were already so successful. And so this is a little bit how the journey went for us. And I want to show this also to you to give you a sense of how long does it take to implement something like this? When did we reach results? Because if you want to do something similar in your company, it's good to know, does it take 3 months or 10 years? Or what is the ROI of the investment that you have to make? And I would say these times are sort of almost the maximum because we are a large organization. If you're a smaller organization, it will be faster. You can penetrate the organization faster than a huge organization like SAP. So we started out with a fairly small pilot for such a big company with 50 LinkedIn Sales Navigator licenses. And in year 1, we expanded this pilot to 500 licenses. But it was still rather fragmented efforts here and there at SAP. People were trying out. They were actually quite happy with the licenses. But what we saw then in marketing, up until this point, it was mainly a sales effort. And for marketing, we were a little ahead of the curve, I would say, in how to adopt social practices, how to work with social media. And we were looking at what people did when they said they were doing social selling. They were quite happy with the licenses that they got. They were really thinking that they were doing social selling. And we were looking at them and we're like, oh, that this is not really the full potential of social selling. There are actually many of them still using LinkedIn Sales Navigator to hard sell to more people. And this is not what social selling is about. So we started trainings, and we had quite remarkable results with the trainings. I will talk about that later because it's a key success factor for social selling. And because of these trainings, the results of the trainings, we expanded the pilot to 2,000 licenses initially. And in the same year, based on the results, we made a big move as a company and bought 15,000 licenses, LinkedIn Sales Navigator licenses. And at that point, we were the biggest customer of LinkedIn. We also launched a Train the Trainer program that also came to be a key success factor for us. And we connected both the practitioners and the trainers into a community where they could learn from each other, and we could advance faster as an organization in developing these practices. And in year 3, we had 6,500 licenses in use, and we had trained 6,000 employees in doing social selling. So you can see there is a correlation here. We didn't just hand out the licenses because we saw what happened if people are not trained to do it. So we scaled the adoption of the licenses and of the social selling program along with the training program. And so what did we achieve in terms of the results? The first one is related to the training. And this is, if you take something from this presentation, this is the one. So hopefully you pay attention at this point, because when we looked at the people who were doing social selling, we saw that, again, they were hard selling to more people. We saw they were not using the full potential. But again, it was a little hard because they thought they were happy. They thought they were doing social selling. They were quite pleased with the return that they got from the value that they got from the licenses. So what we decided to do, which I recommend to everyone to do something similar if you need a proof point, we took 2 similar teams. They were similar in size, they were similar in revenue, and we took inside sales teams because they have shorter sales cycles, so you can get to the results faster. We trained one of these teams in how to do social selling the right way, and it wasn't a huge investment. I think we were there for 3 days, and we trained them. 9 months after this training, this team generated 7 times more pipeline than the comparable team, 7 times. And as you can tell, and hopefully I didn't promise too much when I said this is the takeaway or a key takeaway from the session, this shows the uplift and the upside. So as you can imagine, then it became a very easy sell for us to go to other sales teams and say, you should invest in training along with the licenses, because this is the potential that you're leaving on the table. Even if your sellers feel like they are getting a lot of value out of the licenses, they can achieve still 7 times more pipeline if you train them well. The second proof point was also important. We saw that over the trainings, we were analyzing then the social selling index that LinkedIn gives you. It's from 1 to 100. And after 70, you typically say then a person is a skilled social seller. And we looked at the people that we had trained that were over 70 in the social selling index. And we saw that on average, they had 160% quota achievement. That was also way higher than the general average quota achievement. So that was our next selling point. You can imagine now, sales managers across the company, when they heard this stat, they were very eager to train their people to become skilled at social selling, to get their score up over 70, because they wanted everyone to have an average of 160% quota achievement. And that turned into this 1.4 billion pipeline that was also mentioned in the introduction. After 2 years, that was what we achieved in pipeline from the social selling program at SAP. And at that time, I actually changed my role because the program was very mature. I had another opportunity. I moved to another part of the company. And I think it was 6 months or a year later, last time I checked the numbers, we were at 2 billion pipeline from social selling at SAP. So this is a big business opportunity. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to take advantage of this opportunity. But of course, when you think about how much you can achieve, these are big numbers. I mean, we're a big company, but even for us, these are big numbers. And that came from social selling, from focusing on the quota carriers. If we think about now the opportunity to expand this to everybody in the company, it becomes, you have a vision, right? You can see an opportunity in front of you, because it really correlates very well to how also the buyer's journey is changing. We know that 80% of B2B purchases start with search. Everything that we do starts with search. We also know that customers spend a very large amount of their time, of their buyer's journey, with researching on their own before they are interested in talking to a vendor. So even if you're a social seller out there, if you have a sales title, maybe you have a little bit of a hard time to get people's attention in this phase when they are making up their mind on their own. But scaling this practice to employee advocacy, where everyone is out there participating in discussions, being helpful, sharing information that helps people find out about your company, that's a huge advantage. Because, like we said before, 70% of the buyer's journey, people are not prepared to talk to vendors, but they are very prepared to talk to people that they trust, a peer, someone who is sharing valuable content. And those two together translate into a huge opportunity. And we know there are some numbers. I believe that the trouble with employee advocacy is that actually it's much harder to tie back to revenue the same way as we did with the 1.4 billion that you can track with sellers, their quota carriers, so you can tie it to the CRM system. Employee advocacy is a little bit more of an indirect link, but there are some numbers that support the business value. In fact, Deloitte tells us that 1 in 3 people comes to a brand through a recommendation. 75% of B2B buyers use social media to be informed about vendors, probably without talking to a vendor, but someone that they trust, information that they find themselves. And we also know that a 12% increase in brand advocacy leads to twice as much, a 2 times increase in revenue growth. So there is definitely business value behind employee advocacy. But I would say there is also a certain icing on the cake, And I always recommend to look at the opportunity a bit more broadly. It's tempting to think about revenue and pipeline because our companies care about those, but there are also other things that we care about. And again, if we think about the experience of the customer, people tend to not like so much to be sold to, but people like buying. And people like it when they are served with information that they can choose how they engage with, when and how they consume this information. So if you have more people out there who are not primarily there to sell, but actually to share information, to engage in discussions, that helps with the customer experience. Not only are you more effective in the 70% of the time where customers research on their own, it's also a better experience for them because the employee advocates are much less inclined to jump too fast towards trying to close a deal or to try to rush the customer through a process because they don't have a quota on their shoulders. It's also very cost-effective marketing. In fact, I saw some numbers a couple of weeks ago from SAP where we calculated how much would we have to pay if we invested in paid media for the same amount of reach that our employee advocates, the information and reach that they generate when they are sharing content. It was in the millions. There is a lot to be earned versus paid if you invest in advocacy. And there is also a huge value in attracting and retaining talent. If you have a lot of people out there who are talking about how they experience working in this company, that helps give people a view of what is the identity, the DNA of your company. There is a reason why sites like Glassdoor are so popular, because normally if you evaluate the company to work for, you might not trust the official channels, the HR marketing or recruiting marketing, as much as you trust people in your network who are talking about their experience working for this customer. So if we think about in many regions around the world, there is a war for talent. We are competing for the best resources. This is a nice icing on the cake that you can get from employee advocacy. And even internal communications. And obviously, it goes without saying, you can't use social media for confidential information when it comes to internal communications. But again, if you're in a leadership role and you have a big organization, you want people to know what type of a leader you are, you can write newsletters to your organizations. But in my experience, it's hard to get attention for newsletters. People tend to not read them, at least not to the end. Whereas people are on LinkedIn and Twitter, most of the people that I know every day. So if you share your identity as a leader, your values, you talk about things that are not confidential, but they give people a sense of how you think about the business, how the business opportunities, anything that is not confidential, people are more likely to read it if you go where they are versus trying to get them to come to your newsletter. So there is a huge set of opportunities that come with employee advocacy. And I think it's also fascinating to think of a shift in perception, maybe a little bit. I don't know in your companies, but in all companies that I work for, at the end of every quarter, especially the fourth quarter, and especially if the numbers were not so great, there was always a rallying cry from the senior management, sometimes even the CEO, that went something along the lines of, everyone is in sales. Everyone needs to support the company in achieving their numbers. And sometimes that felt a little uncomfortable. If you're in finance, if you're in procurement, HR, or even in marketing, it's like, I would like to help, but what can I do? And if you think about employee advocacy this way, it becomes a really powerful way to mobilize everyone to support the company in a way that is actually very much in tune and aligned with how people like to buy. So what is employee advocacy? And this slide is important to me because it's so tempting, and I see so many organizations looking at employee advocacy as an opportunity to use or actually abuse their workforce as a broadcasting tool. And that's not what employee advocacy is. It's not about just sharing as much as possible. It's about generating value. So my heart bleeds a little bit when I see this type of contests where it's like, share as much as you can and you can collect some points and then you win prizes, because it generates spamming. It generates just broadcasting information without adding value, and it becomes annoying. And it's sad because it hurts the company to some degree because it's not helpful, but it hurts even more the reputation of the individual that we are asking to step up and become an employee advocate. So for the same reason, I would never mandate participation in employee advocacy, because if you don't like doing something, you're most of the time also not very good at it. And it doesn't make sense. We should encourage, but not mandate. I also don't like the relying only on sharing tools or these newsletter summaries where we push content out and say to everyone, here is the content that is approved by us. Please share it with everyone you know. Maybe not so interesting. And then it becomes just, again, a spamming machine. I also encourage not just pushing branded content. We should mix it up with external industry, but also our own content. Social media is about people to people. People follow you because they want to know what your opinion is, what you think is important and interesting, not just retweeting or resharing content that someone else said. This we want everyone to read this. So instead, employee advocacy is very much about building the personal brand for professional benefit. So we should encourage employees to define and work on their professional brands, help them find out what is it that they want to be known for, so that we can train them in helping them be credible and valuable experts in these areas. It's also a very good idea to recognize and reward your social superstars, because it's much easier to learn if you can observe someone who is doing really well. So recognize and put the light on them so that others can see this is how it works. I can pick the things that feel right for me, of how they are using social media, and learn from that, and you shape a behavior. It's also very interesting to onboard leaders early, because there is something about leading by example. If people leaders encourage their teams to be active on social and they don't have a LinkedIn account, we had some examples like that too, it sends a message. And so it's important to create leaders and onboard the leaders so that they can indeed lead the way. And with that, I want to close with my top 5 success factors from our journey. If you now agree, hopefully, that it's worth investing in social selling and employee advocacy, how do you get from concept to reality? What is it that matters? First of all, it's not done with a license. It would be so nice if we could just flip a switch and then it's done, but that's not the case. One size also never fits all. We'll talk about that in a moment. That has to do with training. What you can't count doesn't count. So there is something here about measurement. If you want pull, you can't push. It may sound very simple, but it's actually not. And last but not least, hang in there. Change can be done, and as I hope you can see from our journey, it doesn't have to take 10 years, but it's also not done overnight. So there is also something about just staying with it and believing in the opportunity. So first of all, it's not done with a license. We talked a little bit about how we saw how people were using social selling. They were hard selling to more people. And it made me realize I sometimes feel like if you give someone just a tool, it's so tempting. And sometimes vendors want to make us believe that if you just have our tool, then everything will be great. You don't have to do anything. But oftentimes, big change has a lot to do with culture, with mindset, with teaching people to do things in a different way. And a tool is the foundation for that, but you have to add the training. So I often say that if you just give someone a tool and you don't train them, it's a little bit like putting a Porsche engine on a bike. People might go very fast, but it's also a little bit dangerous and someone might get hurt. So it's important to set people up for success so that you don't damage the customer experience and the relationship with the customers, but that people use the tool to its full potential and to the advantages. And in our case, that difference between just providing the tool and providing the tool with the enablement was 7 times more pipeline. One size almost never fits all, because you can see in the shop where the one size fits all store, the t-shirt is on sale because it's not going to fit the snake, the turtle, the bird, and the elephant. And this is also very much true for training. I've spent a fair share of my career in sales enablement, and I find that sales is maybe the hardest audience you can have. If you waste their time, they seem to have very little time. They don't forgive you. They don't come back a second time. So it's very important to be specific. If you set up a training, it needs to be role-based. If you think about social selling, if you are targeting inside sales reps or anyone with a big territory and a big white space, or someone who is an account director who wants to deepen relationships in a named account that they know well, or if you're a pre-sales agent or a value engineer, social selling will be super valuable for all of these roles, but people will do it differently. It will look very different how they do social selling. So the training needs to be role-based so that it's relevant for the role that you have, and it needs to be modular so that, again, you don't waste people's time. You will have some people who don't know how to do social selling, but they are very socially savvy. They will move much faster to through your training than someone who is using their computer for writing emails, maybe. Not so much savvy with social media. They need a different curriculum. And if you force everyone to go through the same, then the ones that are savvy are never going to stay until the point where it's valuable to them. So make it role-based, make it modular, and make it hands-on so that people learn while they are doing. It's always most effective to learn while you are doing something, but especially I find in social media, it is important that you create those moments of success for people. If someone who does not have a lot of experience here, they might not have a lot of followers, if you as part of your training teach them how to write a good post, how to use the right hashtags, how to tag the right people, and they can see and feel for themselves that they now have a much wider reach than they thought was possible with a very small amount of followers, they will do it again and again. If you create those moments of success where people feel like I can have a bigger impact if I do it this way, they will not forget. And you will not have to convince them to try and do this again and again. And that's important with social media, because most of the time people are inspired to try something, but then they go back from the training, and if they haven't felt the success, there is a bit of a barrier to actually dive in there and do it yourself. The next one is about the measurement. What you can't count doesn't count, so make sure that you can measure. And of course, the reason why we can say that we had the 1.4 billion is because we had a source code in CRM. So we were asking people to tag their opportunities if they come from social selling, so that we can run reports in the CRM system. That was the easier part. It wasn't easy to make sure that you can tag it in CRM, but it was easier. The difficult part was to make the salespeople do it because they didn't get extra money for tagging this in CRM. So sometimes the discipline was not there. And here it comes back to also the proof points, because we could say that you can achieve 7 times more pipeline if you go through this training. The average quota achievement of the social sellers is 160%. There was a lot of demand for this training, which meant we had an advantage. We could go to the sales managers and say, I'm going to train your team on 2 conditions. First of all, you have to join yourself. You have to lead by example. You have to personally stand behind this. And secondly, you need to track in your teams. You need to make sure when you have your forecast meetings, when you have your sales meetings, you need to make sure that your sellers are tagging the opportunities that come from social selling in the system. So over this mechanism, we were able to enforce a bit more discipline around the reporting, which meant that we were not losing as much. And when we got to these big numbers, because we could capture the value that came from social selling. If you want pull, you can't push. This is also interesting. We actually had these type of situations where sales managers would say, yes, we are investing in social selling. Everybody should be on LinkedIn. They should be selling in this way. And then yet in the forecast meetings or in the sales meetings every Monday or whenever they were doing it, they were asking people, how many cold calls did you do? Cold calls. Social selling is the opposite of cold calls. That's what you don't want. You want a pull motion versus a push motion. You want people to be out there, to be interesting, to build their thought leadership, to participate in conversations versus chasing after the customers in the old-fashioned way that we know it. So we were basically asking the sellers to go from being hunters to farmers. And then you can't measure their success on being hunters if you want them to farm. So hopefully you can follow me through this analogy, but it is very important that we are measuring for the things that we want to see and not for the old word. And we might lean back now and say in marketing, we're different, we do everything perfect. No, we also talk a lot about pull, and yet we see that we are chasing after, we're introducing new formats. I have another cartoon here. You can tell I like cartoons from Marketunist, where they are testing new digital ad formats that are hard to ignore. We are pushing ourselves in the face of the customer, even though we know it's not great for the customer experience. It's not a pull motion. It's not inbound. We are not making ourselves interesting enough for people to come our way. We are trying to knock them in the face with a format that is hard to ignore. So measure and track the right things. And last but not least, this is my last page. Don't forget that change is hard at first. And certainly with social selling, it was a little bit messy in the middle when people are trying to learn new things. They are trying to do business in a different way. There are times where it feels turbulent, where it feels hard to believe that, are we really not losing track? Are we not going in the wrong direction? But I can promise you, based on our own experience, that if you hang in there, if you believe in the opportunity, if you invest in training, the end is gorgeous. There is a lot to win by investing in social selling and employee advocacy. And with that, I hope we will stay in touch, and I hope you have some interesting questions for me.
Well, thank you, Malin. Really, really great session. And I was riveted all the way through, to be honest. I have a couple of questions for you myself. I'm just checking if there's any in the chat. Can't see any. There's some nice comments about good work and thank you. But two questions, if I could indulge myself, if that's all right. The first one, you touched on it a little bit, but it's something maybe you don't suffer from as badly as other companies, because at SAP, you have leaders who understand the value of software tools, right? Mm-hmm. But I think one thing I've heard a lot from other companies, I'm not going to say it was us, but lots of people I've spoken to, that the senior leaders, that you're kind of relying on building a profile out there. You talked about this. But some of them expect things to be done for them. So they expect to have the social media account managed for them, for example, and then they lose their authenticity. And I just wonder how many of those kind of conversations you had, and how it went.
Many. Many, and especially in the beginning. In the beginning, it was almost every time. They were listening really. I went into a lot of management meetings, and I was doing my pitch, and everyone was like nodding and smiling really politely to me. And then at the end, I noticed they have not really listened to or really taking in anything, because the last question was also, this is all really great, Malin, but who's going to do it for us? Who's going to write the posts? I'm like, oh, what did I spend all this time explaining? What did I miss? And so the answer to that is absolutely, this is a challenge. And so what you need to do is to find the gems. It's similar to looking for the role models amongst the employees, someone that you can show, this is a person who does it right. And there will always be one or two that are more social by nature, that have more of a natural affinity towards it. Find them and help them become super successful. And then you promote that as much as you can, as if there is no tomorrow, so that people can see that there is a difference in the value that they are getting out of being on social versus the value of someone who is having it done for them or paying an agency. And I actually use this example from time to time, because I saw this also at SAP. The leaders who had an agency who wrote all the content for them, and it looked really nice. And then they moved the company, or they moved the role, and there was no budget for this agency anymore. all of a sudden you lose your identity. Your whole online identity is gone because there is not the same person there who is writing your own content. It's a huge risk. And once people see that, they don't want to give up the control of their own identity. And that's a little bit the way to get them to pay attention, to be prepared to invest in their own social presence, along with showing them what is possible with the people who really do it right.
Great examples. Thank you. We have had some questions in the meantime, so I'll save my second question because there's one come in that is quite similar. But the first one, it comes from France. Mm-hmm. Do you also measure what offers are best suited for this? That start the soft or pull sell the best? If yes, how?
I don't know that we are measuring it in directly in the system. Although I did see some analysis on what worked well, but I would say it's not the primary priority because it depends on there are some other influencing factors as well. But what I would say is I would suggest to start with simpler offers because, again, you want to create those moments of success. We started with inside sales because they have a shorter sales cycle. You get to the proof points faster. You can show the value faster, and they have well-defined offers. I mean, it is true. Generally speaking, you could say it's harder to social sell offers that are really complex, but that's actually not different from in-person sales. It's harder to sell something that is really complex. And so the surrounding activities that you can do on social are still really valuable, but it might not even show up. The work that you do on social selling on a really complex sale, you might not even remember that by the time some of our sales cycles, they last years. And in 2 years, when you close the deal, you might not even remember all the social selling work that I did in the beginning that might have really contributed to the customer coming our way, as opposed to choosing to continue the journey with another vendor. And you might not even realize. So there is a little bit of faith that is also needed to just believe in the process. But if you are in charge of a social selling program and you want to create proof points, then I would say start with the things that have short sales cycles and are really well-defined offers.
A good answer. Appreciate that. I hope France is happy with that. And then actually, towards the end there, you started getting into the next question, which is about the salespeople, and comes from Charles, and he says, he's a big believer in social selling, but he's got problems with buy-in from salespeople. And the question is, do we set targets for the sales teams on social selling? So you were just saying they might not remember how it contributed. Well, if we're measuring things like SSI, connections, meetings, could it affect their commission as well? So it's a good question. Setting targets, measuring the salespeople in their pocket.
It's a very good question, and I'll be honest. I think if you set targets, people are smart, and salespeople are definitely very smart. They might be motivated to find a way to cheat the system. So I would more advise to take another route. I mean, you can set targets, you can force people to a certain degree, but also if you force people, they tend to be less successful with it, in my experience. I would rather focus on really creating the proof points. This is why the 7 times more pipeline, it was a huge breakthrough moment for us. That was a key success factor because we could go out with something that was credible for them and say, look, you have LinkedIn Sales Navigator anyway. If you invest in the training, if you do social selling the right way, you can achieve 7 times more pipeline. Do you want or do you not want that? You invest 3 days. Everyone said yes. They came to us. We didn't have to sell this training anymore. They came to us. So I would really say, try to generate proof points that are beyond doubt, that are going to convince people in a positive way that makes them want to do it. Because otherwise, if you try to force it, in my experience, they will find ways to cheat the system. They will say they were social selling, put something in, and they, they achieve their KPI, but actually you haven't driven a change from the direction of what is going to have an impact on the business. So I would say focus on the role models, focus on really creating strong proof points, and then go out and sell those proof points and create a demand for what the value is.
Very good. You obviously know salespeople really well.
I spend a fair amount of my time in sales enablement.
I'm sorry, anyone on the call. I've been in sales for quite a while. So, the last question, I think we've got time for one more, if that's okay, Robert. A really good question from Cesare, who's actually the next speaker. So that's quite good. You can get him back if you don't like this in some time. Right. This is a question about content, and I just will cut it a little bit short. But there's lots of. It's hard to find the right content. It's distributed amongst many repositories in big companies, and clearly, it's not about dictating which approved content should be posted. But how do you solve the content repository kind of challenge?
I actually have an easy answer to that, I hope. Because again, I actually think it's good that the content is scattered. I think there is a real danger in pushing out a consolidated view of content and saying, I mean, we have 100,000 employees at SAP. If we said to everyone, these are the 2 pieces of content everyone should share, I mean, people will go crazy. Everyone will get the same piece of information 100 times or 1,000 times because they have so many SAP people in their networks. We will destroy our brands. It will be annoying for people. So my approach has always been the other way around. Teach people to share the content that they find interesting. And this is why I said it's a simple answer. I teach people, when I teach social selling, to read like a publisher. Whenever you search for content for yourself, every one of us, we are searching for content because we want to educate ourselves. We want to stay on top of what's going on in the market. When you search information for yourself, read that content with your network in mind. Read as a publisher. Read with the glasses on of your audience. And then while you are reading, it takes no extra effort. A lot of people ask me, oh, but how do all these people who do so much on social media, do they not work at all? Yeah, why do they have so much time? And I always say the same thing. If you read for yourself, every one of us do, because we have to educate ourselves, read as a publisher, pick out the things that are interesting for your network, click and copy, paste, and share. And then you add your own opinion to it. It takes a moment, and it's integrated into what you're doing anyway. And that teaches people to find the information that is interesting. If it's interesting to you, it's probably interesting to your network. You tell them why it's interesting for them as well, instead of pushing pre-selected content to them.
Fantastic, and thanks for that. We've had even more questions. Apologies, I haven't got all of them in, including Adam's one where he's worried his friend might be a dinosaur. But what I'd suggest is we do have a coffee networking break right now, and it's a great opportunity to sort of you can go and have a look yourself now, because I know you've only been able to see your presentation screen for the last half an hour. The questions tab as well as the chat tab, great chance to interact and maybe answer those pieces as well. Robert, do you want to explain the format quickly?
Yes. For the next 45 minutes is our first coffee break, which is actually, we would like you to be still at your screen, click a chair at one of the tables, and meet each other. You can have face-to-face virtual meetings, private, small virtual meetings with whoever you'd like to meet. You can invite people for private meetings at some of the quieter tables, or you can join one of the more busy tables. You can just put your mouse over other people's profiles to see who they are, what their job title is, and you can have discussions that way. So for that, your camera and your audio has to work successfully. Let me know if any of you don't see the tables, but so long that you're using Chrome and that you're on a good internet connection, in most cases it should be fine. But during the next 45 minutes, please click a chair, join the discussions. Let's have some good spontaneous discussions. In the audience that you see in the attendees button, you can see who else is here, and I can guarantee for every person who's here, there is at least one other person who you can meet at this event who will fundamentally give you information and insight that will make it all worth being here just alone from that discussion, because the diversity and the uniqueness of the attendees is what makes this community interesting. So please take advantage of the breaks so we can build on the content we've heard in the presentations and have some great discussions. And then we'll return here at exactly 12 noon Central European time. So we'll see you in 45 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you soon.